Well, we may have new lead ball carriers for the Jaguars and the Giants, maybe. Who knows? We definitely have a new head coach for the New York Jets. We'll talk about that. And we certainly have a lot of players to add from the waiver wire today and maybe tomorrow. It's going to be a busy day making those waiver claims. Welcome, everybody, to Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM, the sportsbook born in Vegas. I am Adam Azer with Dave Richard and Jamey Eisberg. I know those guys. Hey, guys, any undefeated teams left for you fantasy analysts?
Yes, I think 4.
You had 3 last week. How do you have 4 this week?
No, well, I added a guillotine league, so it's still undefeated.
Okay, fine.
the great Nando Defino made me do another league.
That question hurts my heart, Adam. I lost my last undefeated team last night.
And I know I asked you a few days ago, Dave, and you said no, but I have a 9-1 team in the Scott Fish Bowl.
That's awesome.
Is that an undefeated team? Because I've beaten every opponent.
There's a 1 in the loss column.
Yeah, but I didn't lose. I just didn't finish in the top half of scorers that one. I'm 9-1. I'm 5-0 in my head-to-heads.
I mean, it's not as bad as saying that the
undefeated.
Afternoon starts at 11:30, but it's pretty bad.
Yes, you're undefeated.
He's not undefeated.
He is.
He's 9-1.
The scoring, again, your head-to-head is what counts.
Who has defeated me, Dave? Nobody has defeated me. Anyway,
you've been in the bottom half of scoring 1 week.
Yeah, it's not a loss. Let's get to our 5 big topics.
Otherwise, you'd be 10-0.
Okay. I'm running the show. All right, let's get to our 5 big topics. Dave, I'll let you start. The Jets fired head coach Robert Saleh. They replaced him with interim head coach and defensive coordinator Jeff Ulbrich. Is there any fantasy impact here, Dave?
Yeah, I think Aaron Rodgers is really got a lot of pull in that organization, and that means Davante Adams will probably be a Jet sooner than later. I don't know what's going to change offensively. I don't think Saleh had any say in what was happening there. Rodgers might not have gotten along with Robert Saleh. We saw that on TV after they had a moment a couple weeks ago. But we need to see them get back to blocking well for the run game, and we need to see Breece Hall start to step up again. It's been too many weeks without a big game from Breece Hall. I'm hoping that's one of the first things that Ulbrich addresses with the team.
And Jamey, what do you think? Any fantasy impact here?
No, I think the big move is going to be coming, as Dave said, if they trade for Davante Adams. So once that happens, then we can sort of reevaluate where Garrett Wilson falls, how Adams is going to look at, almost 32 years old. Will Rodgers become a must-start fantasy quarterback, or is he still just a borderline guy in really super flex and 2 QB leagues? Can Breece Hall get going, like Dave alluded to? Losing Morgan Moses, I think, has been a big part of what the struggles have been the last couple of weeks. So once the next domino falls and Davante Adams goes to the Jets, if that happens, then we can, I think, readjust what we think about this offense.
Okay, here we go. Big topic number 2. Let's talk about the Saints-Chiefs game last night, with the Chiefs going to for a 26-13 win. Dave, are the Chiefs undefeated? Yeah, of course they're undefeated.
Depends. What was their score versus the league?
26 points was probably in the upper
There's
half.
a 0 in their loss column. They are undefeated, obviously. But Patrick Mahomes also had a 0 in his touchdown column, and that's making fantasy managers really frustrated. They're moving the ball really well. Kareem Hunt had a great game. Travis Kelce's back. JuJu Smith-Schuster was awesome, and yet Patrick Mahomes can't get to over 20 fantasy points. It's kind of crazy.
It was a 8-point swing in the interception in the end zone.
Yeah.
Because 6 points going that way, 2 points going the other way, and so that turned into it would have been a 21-point game for him. He finished with 13 fantasy points. So that would have made people feel a lot better, especially seeing JuJu perform the way that he did and Kelce getting back to being Kelce. This offense is so old. I mean, between Kareem Hunt at 29 doing what he's doing, Kelce at 35 doing what he's doing, JuJu and Mahomes. Mahomes obviously not the elder statesman there, but these guys have to hold up. I think the bye is coming at a right time for them. The biggest thing is, similar to the Jets, are they going to be aggressive in trade to address the receiver position? Because now we know Rice is out for the remainder of the regular season, and do they feel like they need to add another piece? They've added a wide receiver at the trade deadline each of the last 2 seasons, and I think this year is going to be some pretty big names available, not just Davante Adams. Amari Cooper is going to be most likely on the block, and you may see another wide receiver or 2, depending, let's say, if Seattle continues to lose, or they just shop Tyler Lockett, for example. So wouldn't be surprising if the Chiefs are overly aggressive in trying to add another wide receiver, but maybe JuJu's performance last night sort of said, okay, we could pump the brakes a little bit, at least for another week or 2, and see how the landscape shakes out in terms of the receivers that might be available.
Who would you guys rather have rest of season, Chris Olave or Brandon Ayuk coming off a big game?
Wow, that's really close.
So Ayuk for me, just knowing that Derek Carr may miss some time.
Yeah, I mean, if we knew that Derek Carr was going to miss multiple weeks, Ayuk would be the right answer.
Okay. All right, Chiefs with the win, 26-13 over the Saints. Let's talk a little trade here. Your favorite buy low. Jamey, I'm going to throw it to you. You want to buy low on Bijan?
Yeah, I mean, look, now's the time to do it. It's such a great matchup this week against Carolina. He better do something this week, because if Tyler Algier gets another game where he's 9+ touches and Bijan is not doing very much, especially as a runner, then we really have to hit the panic button. So I think when you just look at this matchup, it's the same thing really for Breece Hall too, because it's a great matchup against the Bills. So both these guys who are 2 and 3 depending on the order in fantasy drafts have been bust at this point, and a lot of it has to do with offensive line struggles, with a second guy taking work. But this is the matchup why you drafted this type of player. So Bijan Robinson better come out and be dominant, and if not, then we really have a problem. But trade for him now, because if there's a fantasy manager struggling with Bijan Robinson, you might be able to help them with a receiver, quarterback, another running back, some sort of package, and maybe Bijan's the best of Bijan rest of the way.
I do shudder to think what we would view Bijan as and what the fantasy community would view Bijan as if he has a dud game against Carolina. I don't think it's going to happen. I think he's going to be awesome. I think it's a good call to buy low on him. I'm going to buy low on Tyreek Hill. I think that we saw him start to play a little bit better with Tyler Huntley last week, but eventually Tua Tagovailoa, the reports say he's coming back. And when he's got Tua throwing to him, the numbers are huge. He's a top 3 overall receiver in fantasy when he's got Tua. So I would make the move to get Tyreek Hill right now. You can get him relatively cheap compared to what his value was 3-4 weeks ago.
Are we confident that Tua is going to be back in week 8 when he's first eligible?
That's the reports, and Mike McDaniel said, everything right now is trending in the right direction. At least that's, to summarize it, and hopefully that's the case. I mean, look, they need him, and I think the fact that they got the win, Buffalo loses, Jets are struggling right now, Patriots, obviously the Patriots, they could still win the AFC East, at 2 and 3, easily could make a case that they should have been 3 and 2 if they had handled their business at home against the Titans. And so no matter what happens in week 7, 2 and 4 at worst, they get Tua back and everything's still right there in front of them. So I agree with Dave. Now's the right time to get Tyreek Hill, but I think really the only Tyreek Hill manager that is trading him is the manager going into the bye week losing record. Because if you have a winning record, that Tua's hopefully coming back,
right? And
you're not going to trade him. You're certainly not going to trade him cheap. So you got to prey on the Tyreek Hill manager that's in a tough spot right now that needs to get a win. But hopefully again Tua's back, and you can make the same argument. Buy low on Jalen Waddle too.
Yeah, you can pray on the Tyreek Hill manager. You can pray for the Tyreek Hill manager. He's probably not, or she, probably not having a great season. Let's talk about our favorite sell high candidates. And Dave, we'll start with you. Who do you want to sell?
Well, wow, look at what Garrett Wilson did. 22 targets, 13 catches, 101 yards, a touchdown. He's here. Finally, Garrett Wilson's awesome, except he might be the number 2 receiver on his own team. His quarterback is old. The schedule, it's not as bad as it was to start the season, but it does get tough at times. I would try and move on from Garrett Wilson. If you could somehow come up with a package where you're giving Garrett Wilson and a little bit to get Tyreek Hill, I'd be all over that. I think that that's the smart thing to do. The value will probably not get higher for Garrett Wilson, and it will definitely not get higher if the Jets acquire Davante Adams.
Do you think that someone is trading for Garrett Wilson now knowing that?
I think if a team is desperate for a wide receiver and they're not paying as much attention to the news as we are, they might.
Now, would you sell Garrett Wilson if Davante Adams goes to the Saints?
Yeah, I still would. I don't see.
You still would?
He's not, Jamey, I don't know how many games he's going to have 22 targets and 13 catches. He's going to be the target leader for the Jets. But eventually they'll be able to run the football.
If he's still the number 1 guy there, he's not getting 22 targets, but he may get 12. And 12 targets for him with what this potential still could be, like, you got to get something great in return if you're trading that. It's easy to trade him if Davante Adams goes there, but I don't think many people are looking at it and saying, oh, wow, I'm taking Garrett Wilson, not knowing that Adams. You got to be living under a rock to not know that Davante Adams may be going to the Jets.
Well, he had an 11 target game in week 1 and he finished with 12 PPR points. So just because he's going to get a lot of targets.
That was against 49ers.
True. But I think that Garrett Wilson will not have a game like this the rest of the season, no matter what.
Doesn't really have a great schedule, and he's being used in such a lame way. Nothing downfield. So the targets aren't really worth as much, because he's just like, okay, what's he going to get per target? Not that much. He's not going downfield. Yeah, I don't know. I'm conflicted because I do have him. The Davante Adams thing, is there a possibility that the Davante, we don't really have time for this, but could it help him? Could it help? Could it open things up?
I mean,
and not He won't be shadowed by Christian Gonzalez. He won't be shadowed by Joey Porter. He won't be shadowed by Stan.
It's a great point because who's benefited with the shadow coverage for Garrett Wilson right now? It's Allen Lazard. He's got 4 touchdowns on the season. He scored in 3 of 5 games so far. So maybe that's Garrett Wilson, and Garrett Wilson's a much better version of Allen Lazard as the second receiver. So that could definitely be a case, Adam, that you could look at and say Wilson now getting more opportunities, unless you're a defense coordinator and saying Davante Adams, after watching some tape, is a little bit older, a little bit slower, maybe not getting off the line as quickly as he typically does, and now Wilson is still getting that type of attention because he's the player on the rise and Adams might be the player on the decline.
Could Davante Adams be a sell high?
Who's buying him right now?
I don't know, but people might buy him on the idea that he's going to be a number 1 receiver on a better team with a better quarterback. And if they think how you think, where he's a little older, a little slower, not quite as good, maybe you could get more for him now versus maybe you do it when the trade happens, maybe something like that.
Yeah, I guess there's a sucker in every league. So sure, go ahead and make those trades.
No, I mean, I kind of see what you're saying is that, well, I don't know how people are going to view Davante Adams. It'd be a sort of polarizing player, but I think people are going to expect him to go to the Jets, and I'm not sure how many people think that's going to be good for him. The Jets have looked pretty bad. I'd be pretty excited, though, if he went to the Jets, just getting off the Raiders.
Yes.
All right, we got to talk about Jamey's sell high. It's James Conner.
Older player, he's been fantastic so far. 4 or 5 games, he's been a superstar, and I hope it continues. But the only reason I bring up James Conner is because the other older running back got hurt last week in Aaron Jones, or one of the older running backs got hurt last week in Aaron Jones. And we know Conner typically misses 3 games. It's happened to him 5 of the last 6 seasons, He's missed at least 3 games a year. And so do you want to get ahead of it before he potentially gets hurt? Because, again, it just is something that has been in his profile. So I hope he stays healthy. I'm not giving away for peanuts at this point because there's still so much potential based on what he's done. And in losses, like again 2 weeks ago, he was fantastic still running the ball. But if you want to try and make sure you don't suffer with him getting hurt, now's the time to trade.
All right, let's get our top 3 waiver wire priorities for Fantasy Week 6. Jamey, we'll start with you.
Yeah, it's 2 running backs and a receiver. You're looking at Tank Bigsby and Tyrone Tracy, both stepping up huge in Week 5. Bigsby beat up on a bad Colts defense, but looked better than Travis Etienne, maybe at any point this season. And the week before, a 7-carry, 90-yard performance against a good Texans defense. He's not catching the ball, only has 1 catch so far in the season, and you're counting on him to find the end zone, which he did twice, but still looking like might be able to take over the backfield in Jacksonville. Tyrone Tracy stepping in for Devin Singletary with the groin injury. And let's go JuJu Smith-Schuster just with the idea of if you don't need somebody for this week and you can wait it out for 2 weeks, comes back in Week 6, building off the 130-yard performance that he just had against the Saints. There's a lot to like about JuJu moving forward.
I have the exact same order. Fantastic.
And I just realized, in the middle of your answer, I did my waiver claims in 8 of my leagues, and JuJu's on a bye. I don't know that I even looked for JuJu. I forgot. I skipped over JuJu. So it's tough sometimes with players who are going on a bye. They don't show up in the projections. Make sure you type in JuJu Smith-Schuster's name. I'm going to go back and do that again in all of my leagues. All right, we're going to take a break here. When we come back, we'll talk about the running backs and the quarterbacks for you to get. Oh, it's Daniel Jones week. What? We'll be right back on Fantasy Football Today. We welcome you back to Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM. And let's take a look at quarterbacks and running backs on the waiver wire. So Kirk Cousins is at Carolina. You got a couple of quarterbacks at the top of Jamey's list here who have very nice matchups this week. Cousins at Carolina and Daniel Jones hosting the Bengals on Sunday night. And we're hopeful that Malik Neighbors will be back. Jamey, if Malik Neighbors were not back, how would you feel about Daniel Jones?
I mean, he was terrible against Seattle. Without Malik Neighbors. Look, he's been good. And I think Darius Slayton, just based on how he performed, he's not Malik Neighbors, but he gave him enough of a secondary option or lead option, depending on how you want to review Wandale without Neighbors there, that you got to feel good about Daniel Jones. He's running for about 30 yards per game as well, so, starting to get his legs underneath him. So just based on the matchup against Cincinnati, they just lost a key piece of their secondary with Dax Hill being out. I like him as a low-end starter.
I actually like 5 of his next 6 matchups. And it starts with Cincinnati in week 6. But there could be some staying power. He needs the offensive line to stay healthy. He needs Neighbors back. Let's face it. He's fine without him against Seattle. They really need Neighbors for him to really start to hit his ceiling. And I think that the matchups moving forward make him, at minimum, a good bye-week replacement at quarterback, and at maximum, a potential top 12 fantasy quarterback. I can't believe the words that are coming out of my mouth when it comes to Daniel Jones, but the schedule helps him out here.
You guys are all wearing big blue.
Look at that. Yeah. So Kirk Cousins, though, is number 1 on the list, and it makes sense. Coming off a 500-yard game, Carolina is also a great matchup here. Who are some quarterbacks, Jamey, that you would start Kirk Cousins over this week?
Oh, wow. Trevor Lawrence coming off a good game. Aaron Rodgers. Brock Purdy. I would start him over Purdy. I start him over Geno Smith, who leads the NFL in passing yards. I mean, it's tailor-made for him to come in and just continue to build off it. He said after last week's game that he's starting to feel healthier coming off the Achilles injury, and it showed. He's driving the ball down the field. He talked about seeing some running lanes that he should have taken advantage of. You see the way his receiving core now with 3 guys stepping up, if Kyle Pitts is going to continue to do that, because Darnell Mooney's been a pleasant surprise since week 2, and Drake London stepping into that third-year breakout performance. So with the way that the offensive line is starting to block for him, getting healthier, the one concern would be, is this a Bijan game? But I think even if it's a Bijan game, like we saw for the Bears last week, you can still get a 20-plus point game from the quarterback. So it's starting to look easy for Cousins right now, and I think he's got top 10 upside for maybe not just this week, but the rest of the season.
And let me just tell you, after this week, he's got Seattle, Tampa, Dallas, New Orleans, Denver. The Denver game, that's in week 11. That's one that could be tough for him. Broncos defense looks really good, but they look really good right now. I'm looking at a lot of games where I think Kirk Cousins is going to need to throw. I don't think it's going to be the case this week. I'm not huge on Kirk Cousins this week, but moving forward, Kirk Cousins has a chance, like Daniel Jones, maybe even a better chance of Daniel Jones, to be a top 12 fantasy quarterback.
And Dave, you are a little higher on Joe Flacco this week, assuming he's the starter at Tennessee.
Right. So I really like what I've seen from Joe Flacco. 5 touchdowns over his last 2 games. And yes, favorable matchup in one of them, but the Steelers were another one, and he came in cold off the bench, and he tore them apart. And so now he's getting the Titans. On paper, the Titans defense, very, very good. You look at the quarterbacks that they've played this year, and they haven't done great, or they have done great against them, but it hasn't been anybody good. The 2 quarterbacks that have had at least 19 fantasy points against them, one was Malik Willis. He had a bunch of rushing touchdowns, but he did throw for over 200 yards against the Titans. And the other one was Aaron Rodgers, who had 2 touchdowns, not quite 200 yards, 19 fantasy points. I think Joe Flacco can beat that. I think Flacco will be a real test for this Titans defense. I love what I've seen from him. If he's the starter, and that is a huge white and blue if he's the starter, he would be ahead of both Cousins and Daniel Jones for me in the rankings.
Just keep an eye on that offensive line for the Colts. Down potentially 2 starters in the middle of that defense against that front for the Titans. We could see Joe Flacco running for his life.
Well, I don't know if he's really going to run. He's going to try.
He had a big run.
He did have
a big run against Jacksonville.
He had a big run. Would you drop Patrick Mahomes for Cousins or Daniel Jones?
I would think if you're stuck and that's the only position that you can do quarterback for quarterback because you're really loaded elsewhere, then yes, he's just not been a good fantasy quarterback. I mean, what is it now? Almost a full season where he's gotten 1 game or 2 games over 21 fantasy points. He's just not getting the job done. Yeah. He's gotten 1 so far this season. It's just, he's a bad fantasy quarterback. He's an MVP candidate, but he's a bad fantasy quarterback.
I would try and make that ad drop on like Saturday, though, just so you have a chance to get him back after the games on Sunday. We know he's not going to play, so maybe you'd have a decent chance to get him back then.
Yeah, it's 2 games with more than 21 fantasy points in his last 18, including the playoffs. Oh. All right, so let's focus on the running backs now. Tank Bigsby and Tyrone Tracy at the top of the list. Ty Chandler, you can say what you want about Aaron Jones, but give the guy credit. If he's going to get hurt, do it going into your bye week. That is professional stuff, Aaron Jones. But seriously, Chandler might be at the top of the list if they weren't on a bye this week. But he's got maybe more long-term potential here. Definitely more long-term potential with Bigsby and Tracy. Jamey, how do you see those backfields looking in Jacksonville and in New York?
So you brought up a good point on our Fantasy Football Today podcast this morning that we could be fooled by these guys. So just be careful with the fab you're going to spend. I wouldn't go crazy with it. Nothing more than 20% unless you're absolutely stuck and need to get a running back. But Bigsby might end up being the best running back for the Jaguars, and Tracy might end up being the best running back for the Giants. probably due to injury. ETN's dealing with some sort of shoulder ailment that kept him out of the end of the game last week for Jacksonville, and we know Singletary missed the game against Seattle with the groin problem. Now, he said he was close to playing last week, so might be able to get back out there against the Bengals, especially after he saw what Tracy just did, and ETN might be able to fight through the shoulder injury. But there was some talk prior to that game that they were going to use ETN more as maybe a third down back or passing downs back and lean on Bigsby a little bit more to get those first and second down carries, and then we could see Tracy maybe taking on a bigger role moving forward after he showed us what he just did in that game against the Seahawks. But if they're starting, or at least in prominent roles, like in the case of Bigsby over ETN, they have the chance to be number 2 running backs this week. They both have somewhat favorable matchups. I like the matchup for Tracy more so than I do for the Jaguars guys. But in the case of both of them, you've seen some big performances lately. Why not ride the hot hand?
Dave, I think one of the harder things to do is figure out who to drop, right? Because there's obviously risk in getting Bigsby and Tracy. And, one guy I'm dropping in every league I have him in is Cam Akers, even for Dare Ogunbowale, who we can talk about here. But,
sure.
The Bears wide receivers not named DJ Moore. Do you drop a guy like Cortland Sutton or something like that who could be useful some weeks? What caliber of player are you willing to drop for Bigsby or Tracy?
It would be a significant player, but I would hope that there's somebody worse than a significant player on my bench, that it could just be an easy cut. It could be somebody that's on bye in week 6 or coming back from a bye in week 5 and really wasn't a starter for my team to begin with. The number one thing that I always think about when I go to drop somebody from my team is how quickly will other managers in my league race to pick the guy up. That's the problem with if you drop Patrick Mahomes on a Tuesday night and he's off your team Wednesday morning, he's going to be on somebody else's team by Friday when the waivers run again. So if it's somebody that's popular, if it's somebody who's been good, if it's somebody who's going to help multiple managers in your league and you can see that, you probably should think twice before dropping that player.
Okay, some other running backs. We've got Roschon Johnson, Jaylen Warren, Tajay Spears, Dare Ogunbowale, who I mentioned, Cam Akers, Jaleel McLaughlin, Jalen Wright, Amir Abdullah. Dave, did I say any names that make you want to jump out of your seat and do the wave?
I might do the wave for Ogunbowale in full PPR leagues. He played 2/3 of the snaps in week 5. He looked good doing it. He could be in line for as many as 20 touches against the Patriots in week number 6. Really think the Texans like what they're getting out of him, and we know that he will catch the ball a good amount out of the backfield. And don't forget, if there's no Joe Mixon and if there's no Nico Collins, the Texans are going to need to do something to move the chains. It could be Ogunbowale who actually gets that opportunity. So I don't mind him. He's my 4th favorite running back to pick up just overall this week. But if I don't need Ty Chandler, I need somebody for week number 6. He's going to be 3rd behind Tracy and Bigsby.
All right. Anything to add, Jamey? You want to make a case for McLaughlin or Spears is so interesting. The fact that he's 59% rostered. I mentioned on the show this morning he's facing 2 teams that really struggle against pass catching running backs. I actually think I have to start him in a couple leagues this week because of injuries and buys. So Spears jumps out. Warren's kind of similar. What do you think?
Warren's a good stash candidate. I mean, clearly we see Najee Harris struggling since Warren has gone down. Cordell Patterson also going to be out for week 6, as is Warren. So he's most likely not going to play. Mike Tomlin listing him as doubtful. So you got to be patient. But down the stretch, he may end up being the best running back for the Steelers. Spears is interesting. 10.1 PPR points or more in each of his last 2. Had 15 carries last week against the Dolphins. That's not sustainable because Tony Pollard had 22 carries in that game. So Pollard's still going to be the lead running back. But there's lottery ticket upside there just in case Pollard were to get hurt. You know that Tyjae Spears could step in and be the featured guy in an offense that's done I think surprisingly well running the ball. But yes, he's got 2 games with 4 catches on the season and can certainly be at least a flex. And this is one of those things, going back to the question you asked Dave about dropping guys. There were people dropping him. He was about 65 to 70% rostered going into their bye week. He gets dropped. Now people that are dealing with some injuries or looking for a plug-and-play type of guys with flex and PPR, they're picking up Tyjae Spears. So just be careful about some of the guys that you're drafting. Like Dave said, it's like you could see somebody on the waiver wire on a Wednesday or Thursday, and that might be somebody that not necessarily this week, but in a couple weeks could be a significant player for you.
Absolutely. All right, we're going to take a break. We have a few more segments left. We're going to talk about wide receivers and tight ends, and don't worry, who has more is coming up in a little bit.
Who has more
next
what?
up, you'll find out. We'll all find out together. It'll be a fun team-building exercise. But when we come back, wide receivers and tight ends on the waiver wire on FFT. We are back talking wide receivers and tight ends to pick up off the waiver wire here on Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM. Did you know that JuJu Smith-Schuster is 27 years old?
More.
He is younger than Samuel. He is in his prime, and he went for 130 yards last night, and he might be the best wide receiver to add. Jamey, let's take a look at your list of waiver wire wide receivers, and I know it's not as cut and dried as this is the order. So in what scenario is JuJu Smith-Schuster, 7% roster, the number one player to add at wide receiver?
If you don't need anything, if you're just looking to make some moves to tweak or just enhance your roster, then JuJu should be probably the number one player to add. I mean, you're talking about potentially the number one receiver for Patrick Mahomes. You're talking about the Rashee Rice replacement. If you were to say before the season, would you add Rashee Rice off the waiver wire? Yeah, he was amazing before he suffered the knee injury. So if this holds up, if he stays in this role, if they don't go and add somebody, because they're in the Davante Adams conversation, according to reports, I would imagine they're knocking on the Browns' door and maybe calling, some of these other teams and saying, hey, is this receiver available? Is that receiver available? They made some minor tweaks over the last couple of years and bringing Mecole Hardman back from the Jets. They made a big splash to get Kadarius Toney when we thought Toney was still going to be something in the NFL. So this front office is aggressive in trade, specifically at this position. And there is still a need, whether you buy into JuJu or not. But will JuJu stay the number one receiver? 2 years ago with Kansas City, 6 games, 13.9 PPR points or more. He was on a fantastic pace before he suffered a concussion in the middle of the year. So Mahomes trusts him. Reed trusts him. And hopefully the guy that we saw that year, the guy that we saw in Pittsburgh, can reemerge and maybe be one of the best fantasy finds off the waiver wire this season.
And Dave, what's your take on the wide receiver position? We got a couple of Giants on there. We've got Josh Downs and Alec Pierce, and we've got JuJu Smith-Schuster and Jalen Tolbert. I know you like. What's your take on the wide receiver?
I'm a fan of Tolbert, but he's not number one for me. And I love what the Giants receivers did in Week 6 and what Wandale's done all year. He's not number one for me. The list that we showed a minute ago had 13 names on it. So if you prioritize JuJu first, you're able to go and get another wide receiver off that list or even past that list. There are a ton of wide receivers that you can add this week, some of whom are almost as good of a stash as JuJu is, others who can be a plug and play for week number 6. I think the position is really rich this week. It's loaded. So you can afford to go spend 20% of your fab to get Smith-Schuster and then put him on your bench for a week and find a replacement for him.
Now let's just make it clear. Wan'Dale Robinson has been fantastic, as the second guy. And we're talking about JuJu in a game where he had 7 targets. That's what Wan'Dale Robinson in one game has done in a half. Like, he's just been so fantastic in terms of being a go-to guy for Daniel Jones. He's been better, more targeted than a lot of number one wide receivers so far. So neighbors in, neighbors out. It hasn't mattered, at least in the one-game sample size that we have. Daniel Jones is playing very well right now, and a big reason why is Wan'Dale Robinson. So Neighbors has been a superstar, but Wan'Dale Robinson has definitely been Robin to Neighbors' Batman. And so if you are looking for a wide receiver, I'm shocked that he's still rostered in only 64% of leagues on our site, so he's probably still more available in some of the other sites that you may play on. He has been a PPR must-start wide receiver, and now he's starting to score touchdowns. And if that happens, my goodness, we may be looking at a top 20 receiver no matter the format that you play in.
Did you realize that he had the name Robin in his name when you said that? Or is that
No.
just it's very good. Wan'Dale, this is his 17-game pace. It's pretty hilarious. It's 160 targets, which is wonderful. It's 109 catches, terrific. It's 782 yards.
Right.
So I struggle with this kind of player, but for now, you keep writing it out. And the competition, for the Giants, that 5 of their next 6 games, or 4 of their next 5 games maybe, over 5 of their next 6 weeks, they have a bye in there, are really favorable matchups beginning this week against the Bengals. So I definitely see the appeal there. And then, it's funny. It's like, oh, you know what? I need a starter. People are going to need starters this week. We got injuries. We got byes. Throw Romeo Doubs in there. He might get 6 targets. Michael Wilson's been getting a lot of targets. Sometimes he's terrible with them, but that's okay. But Dave, just to speak to your point, right? There are some other guys to get. Who are some of the? You want to bring up that list again? There's Hopkins out there, Lazard, Demario. I don't know if we want to.
Well,
trust Douglas.
You didn't even mention Josh Downs, who's been outstanding in a similar role to what Wan'Dale Robinson does with Indianapolis. And even when Anthony Richardson comes back, there's going to be a couple of games where the target volume isn't going to be high for any wide receiver for the Colts. But I think that this is going to be the guy who might end up leading the team in targets and catches this year. He'll average around 8 yards per, but he's still going to be a very good PPR wide receiver. My favorite 3 are JuJu 1, Wan'Dale 2, Downs 3, and I'll give Tolbert 4. And then there's other names on here, maybe in those shallow leagues, Jacoby Myers, Ladd McConkey, Darnell Mooney, for crying out loud. If he's somehow on your waiver wire, go get him. Forget about everything that we've just said in the last 2.5 minutes and make Darnell Mooney the priority off your waiver wire. If he's somehow still there, still out there in about 30% of CBS Sports leagues.
Okay, it was a good week for tight ends. Let's talk about some that you could add off of the waiver wire now as Travis Kelce and others go on a bye. Dalton Schultz, Jamey, is at the top of your list because Nico Collins is week to week. Tyler Conklin still getting targets. You can look at some disappointing production, but still getting targeted. Cade Otton, a few good games in a row here, and Theo Johnson, guessing that's kind of a neighbor's thing. But and then Evan Ingram's widely available. Was Evan Ingram clearly ahead of this group?
Just based on upside, yes. But, again, for a 1 week situation, I would actually start Conklin and potentially Schultz. Conklin, you say, the production. He's been 11 PPR points or more in 2 of his last 3. In his last 2 games, he actually has 17 targets. So Davante Adams' addition would certainly change that going into the matchup against Buffalo. But if there is no Adams, Conklin is actually my favorite for this week. Schultz is more of a week-to-week thing because of Nico Collins being potentially out week-to-week with this hamstring injury. This is now his opportunity to step up and be more involved. We saw him playing a little bit more on the perimeter in the game last week, so that's something maybe that the Texans are going to have to try and work with, just trying to figure out how to replace their best wide receiver. I'd like it to be Tank Dell, but Schultz last season was very good in terms of being a go-to guy for C.J. Stroud. Taysom Hill is not on this list. I know that's a guy Dave likes. Hopefully he's healthy, dealing with the cracked ribs. If he's able to play, especially with Derek Carr being banged up, he could have an opportunity to maybe get some additional carries. Had 6 carries for 24 yards and 2 touchdowns the last time we saw him in week 4. And then in terms of Theo Johnson, look, we got to help some people in deeper leagues, so 2% rostered. He did have 5 catches. We don't know if Neighbors is coming back. And I think as Daniel Jones is getting more comfortable, as Brian Dable's getting more comfortable with Theo Johnson, who we know, having to replace the retired Darren Waller, they may be giving him just a chance to develop, and now we're starting to see it. So a 5-catch game against Seattle could turn into, maybe 5 for 30, 5 for 50, 5 for 60, and we're talking about a streaming tight end that turns into a weekly starter. So deeper leagues, it's not a bad idea to stash Theo Johnson if you have a roster spot to play with.
And I wouldn't poo-poo Cade Otton either.
Yes.
We've seen Cade Otton get decent PPR production. 2 of the last 3 games, I believe he's been in double digits.
9.7 in 2 of his last 3. So just shy of 10 PPR points 2 weeks ago, over 10 PPR points 3 weeks ago.
That being said, I would probably make a beeline for Taysom Hill first. And if Taysom Hill doesn't practice by Thursday and it doesn't look like he's going to play, you'll cut him. You'll pick up one of the tight ends that we talked about. Someone should be on the waiver wire for you, even if it's Theo Johnson.
All right. Like that strategy. And I love Who Has More, our game show, coming up next on Fantasy Football Today. Welcome back to Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM. It's time now for America's 48th favorite fantasy football-related game show, up 10 spots or something like that from last week. We're really making a lot of momentum swings here with Who Has More. Okay, I'm going to ask you a question. You tell me who has more. Who has more interceptions thrown, Sam Darnold or Jordan Love?
I think it's Love.
Love had the 3 interception game in his first start. And then I'm gonna say Love.
I love this. Is my favorite part of the game is Jamey opening up the encyclopedia and the game logs to try to remember all the stats. It is Love, which is kind of sad. He's only played 3 games this year, and he has thrown 5 interceptions. Jordan Love 5-4. By the way, bonus. Oh, see if I remember this one. Xavier McKinney on the Packers on Jordan Love's team, not intercepting Jordan Love, but he does have an interception in every game. And he has 5 interceptions. There are 3 teams, one of them being the Commanders, that don't have a single interception on the entire season.
McKinney probably gets a lot of practice picking off balls from Love in practice.
There you go. All right. Who has more 20-plus yard carries? And by the way, these next 2 Who Has Mores are going to be my way of comparing Bijan Robinson to the New York Giants. So who has more 20-plus yard carries?
I thought you said who has s'mores. I was hungry now.
Who has s'mores? 20-plus yard carries, Bijan Robinson or Tyrone Tracy?
You've got to assume that if he's asking that question, then it's going to be Tyrone Tracy is the answer, which makes me sad, very sad. And now I also want s'mores.
I'll say Tracy also.
All right, you know what? It is Tracy, Dave, but this logic has gotten you in trouble before. I'm not that predictable, all right?
No, you're not, but now I got to see, like, what do we use to get graham crackers here quickly? Marshmallows. I'm going to start a fire here in the studio.
I think you just call Uber Marone.
I like it. I like it.
By the way, shout out to Marone, 4th most points in our Superflex League. He is 0-5.
Wow.
Oh, man, that's the worst.
Shout out to Marone. Hey, you stink, but good job.
Oh, I feel so bad. He's the best 0-5 I've ever seen.
If anybody needs a s'more, it's Marone.
There you go. All right, who has more carries inside the 5-yard line, Bijan Robinson or Daniel Jones?
There's no way. There might be a way.
I'll go Bijan.
I will too. Bijan.
Oh, you idiots. Obviously, if I was asking you that question, it was clearly going to be Daniel Jones. It's 4-2, Daniel Jones with the win there.
Wow, only 2 for Bijan. I'm telling you, if he has a terrible game against Carolina, people are going to panic. Massive panicking.
Yeah, you know, my concern about Bijan going into week 5 before the Thursday night game was that the Falcons just weren't a good offense. And now I feel a little bit more confident. Maybe they woke up a little bit. If they're a good offense, he should get going a little bit. But what do you think? Is this a good offense, a top half of the league offense?
Yes, it is going to be now. I agree with you that game told us something. It's also, look, they've had some injuries on the offensive line. He had a shoulder injury going into week 4. He had the hamstring injury going into week 5. Who knows how healthy he is? And they like Tyler Algier. You know, like we could sit here and say they shouldn't give the other guy any touches. They like what Algier did. Remember, he's a 1,000-yard rusher as a rookie. So, you know, maybe we just didn't give him enough credit coming into the season and rush Bijan Robinson up the flagpole a little bit too quickly.
Who has more rushing yards, Tank Bigsby or Travis Etienne?
I think it's Bigsby.
I'm going to go Etienne.
Oh, Dave gets the point. It is Clive Bigsby.
It's Clive? Who?
That's my Modern Family Team Name Tuesday joke, Clive Bigsby. But it's Bigsby, 273 to 231 on 19 fewer carries. Who has more carries this week against the Bears? What do you think?
Bigsby.
I'm going to say it's ETN because I think they're going to be trailing and they're not going to run that much.
All right. Who has more PPR fantasy points? This is my favorite one. Mark Andrews or Charlie Kohler?
We laugh, but we should cry.
I'll go Kohler.
I think you're setting it up for it to be Kohler, so I'll say Kohler.
Oh, the logic hurts Dave again. It is Mark Andrews by 1 point.
Really?
22 points to 21 points. 22 points this year for Mark Andrews. He's 1 point better than Charlie Kohler. And I'm looking at a team where I'm 2-3. I hate my team. I need every win I can get. Andrews is obviously not. I won last week. Andrews was part of that. Hooray! Also, my opponent started Gus Edwards. But do I I'm sitting there going, do I drop? I'll let you guys tell me. Do I drop Mark Andrews for Cade Otton?
That's the only move you can make?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm not ready to do it this week.
If you were 1-4, I would say yes because you're really desperate. But 2-3, you know, Mark Andrews may be on the start of something. So I would ride it out. If it was somebody, Tucker Kraft, that's easy. But for Cade Otton or Tyler Conklin or those guys, that we just talked about, I don't think Mark Andrews is dropped both for them yet.
I also think this is a matchup where the Ravens are going to have to throw. So keeping Andrews on the field, number one, that's going to help right away. So he'll play more than half the snaps in the game. And number two, if there's a lot of targets to go around, hopefully he'll get involved against the Commanders secondary. That I don't think it's as good as the offenses that they've played have made it look over the last 2 weeks.
All right, who has more end zone targets? Travis Kelce or DK Metcalf?
Well, that one's... Oh, wait a minute. This could be a trick question, Jamey.
I'm going to say Kelce.
I'm going to say Ty. You told us on the podcast earlier today that Travis Kelce has none.
Yeah, Jamey, you weren't listening to me. That really hurts my feelings. He has 0.
I thought you said that he had just cut the... I'm sorry, yeah, you did say that.
Yeah, I did. No, it's DK Metcalf. DK Metcalf has 1. Travis Kelce has none. And DK Metcalf has been top 4 in end zone targets every year of his career. He's having a great season. So, like Kelce and Metcalf, a lot of yards, at least for Kelce since the Rice injury, but not touchdowns. Well, not short touchdowns for Metcalf. So I'm hoping that'll change. Who has more yards per target, Brian Thomas Jr. or Khalil Shakir?
Oh, it's Brian Thomas Jr.
I'm going to say Shakir.
Let's go, Jamey. First of all, he's caught, I think, 18 of 19 targets.
One miss. Yep, you're right.
Okay.
92%. Yep.
He's got 12.1 yards per target, one of the best marks in football. Brian, 11.7. Yeah, I love that for Shakir, and we're running out of time, so I'm going to give you guys one more here. Who has more air yards per target? Higher ADOT, Christian Kirk or Jamison Williams?
Man, based on how you're asking this one, it feels like it should be Kirk, but I'll say Jamison Williams.
I'm going to say Jamison too.
For you guys are starting to catch on here. It is Williams, but just barely. I'd like to point out Christian Kirk, a 13.5 yard ADOT.
Wow.
That's kind of, yeah, isn't that? I mean, he had the deep ball. It is, and they haven't played 3 receiver sets as much. He didn't play as much last. But I don't know, guys. Who do you like better rest of season, Jamison Williams or Christian Kirk?
It's Jamison for me,
yep.
Just because we know that Evan Ingram's going to be back. And I think Brian Thomas Jr. is the number 1 receiver moving forward for Jacksonville.
All right, we're going to take a break. When we come back, we're going to read your X's here on Fantasy Football Today. We'll be right back with your questions, your ad drop questions after this. Back on Fantasy Football Today, presented by BetMGM, the sportsbook born in Vegas. Let's read some of your tweets. This one comes from Gabe, and he says, would you add Tank Bigsby or Chase Brown?
Wow, if Chase Brown was out there in my waiver wire, I would prioritize him ahead of Bigsby.
Can I be in this league?
No, I have a few leagues. One's a 10-team league. One's a league where we're only allowed to roster 5 running backs in a 12-team league, and you get these types of decisions. I've had actually a few people say Tank Bigsby or Rico Dowdle. So, yeah, there are some people that are making these types of decisions. So, did you guys say Chase Brown?
Yeah, I would take Chase Brown. I've also heard of a league super flex league where somebody dropped Caleb Williams.
For what?
Yeah, and you know what? Heath went in there and he put our entire budget on Caleb Williams, like just to troll me. So I had to delete that. By the way, I'm gonna read Gabe's profile. He says he's a board game hobbyist and a Midwesterner. That's cool. If you're gonna play a board game with Gabe Kessler, what would you suggest?
Monopoly. Keep it simple.
That's a good one. Life.
Keep it simple. You need 4 days to do Monopoly. God, just do Taboo. All right, let's go to our next.
So I guess we're short on questions today. We're going to just start talking about people's profile preferences.
I think I'm going to put a little twist on it. Half PPR. Should I drop Wicks for JuJu or Tolbert?
Yes. JuJu first.
Yeah, I think so. I mean, Tolbert's situation got better. Wicks' situation got worse. You know, we didn't know at the time last week what was happening with Romeo Doubs, and the fact that he's coming back now while Watson even still being out. Watson could return soon. So, yes, take those 2 receivers or Wicks.
He says he's a fantasy football degenerate, a proud nerd, and not a proud Cowboys fan.
Cool.
Okay.
2 of those 3 things are me.
We get one of those things. This is from Ryan. Would you drop Tyrone, Tracy, or Trey Sermon for Josh Downs, Spears, or Mostert?
I would drop Sermon first because Jonathan Taylor could return this week. And even if he doesn't return this week, I'd rather take the chance of Tracy starting against the Bengals as opposed to Sermon starting against the Titans. And I would do it depending on what you need, probably for Spears.
I would get Downs on there. Get Downs. But that was kind of clever.
His receivers are great.
Well, but he doesn't need Odunze.
So I would do both. I would drop Sermon and Odunze to try and get Downs and Spears.
I like it.
Let's go to the next one here. Texas Bruins 67. Should I drop Sutton for those receivers?
Well, if only we knew what receivers they are, Adam. Because
you read a different question.
Oh, you can't see it.
No, we can't see it because the screen is showing how fast are we dropping Patrick Mahomes. This is from Gigabrain Fantasy. He likes to take long walks on the beach. He's a big seafood fan, according to his X profile, and he values rookie quarterbacks in Superflex leagues. No, I don't think you have to drop Mahomes unless he's one of your worst players, and for some people, he's going to be the worst player.
Okay, I think we have the one from Texas Bruins 67. All right, well, he wants to know if you drop Sutton. Yeah, drop Sutton for JuJu, right? You do that.
In a heartbeat.
Yes. Yeah. Okay. Well, that was fun. I already dropped Patrick Mahomes. And you know what? Dave likes to say, are people going to run to the waiver wire to pick him up? And yeah, someone did run to the waiver wire and picked him up, and he was bad again. You can drop Patrick Mahomes if you need to, but he played pretty well last night, just didn't get the touchdowns.
Right.
And that is it for
That's the
Fantasy
problem.
Football today. I want to thank you all for watching. Got another episode tomorrow and Friday at 1 p.m. Eastern. Check out our podcast, Fantasy Football Today, anywhere you listen. For Dave and Jamey, I'm Adam. Have a good day, everybody. Talk to you later.